now not, you're on the other side of it, being a gallery owner, making your own rules and making your own books, like, metaphorically. What do you think has been the biggest upside and the downside of this process?
There are no guidelines or specific rules or even laws sometimes for how to do something. You make up everything. I don't have a complaint about my job. Lots of people I know don't love what they do in this world, but I get up every day essentially really enjoying the life that I'm living. Look at an artwork and something happens to you and you look at it again and you remember how you bought it or the conversation you had with all that is generative. It's very singular. There isn't any other experience like that in the world for you and another object. So that's what makes it so powerful. If you go to any city, any museum, you'll see paintings. Paintings gives us a big chunk of the history of art. I love narrative. I love like the texture and the look of paint. I love the imaginative possibilities of paint.
Welcome to the podcast, Quang.
Thank you very much.
Okay, tell me something. I have had somebody first time from Vietnam, and I'm really, really interested in knowing about it. I read about you, and I know that you come from Vietnam to now New York. Can you share a little bit about yourself and everybody who's listening? What you do also?
Right. I'll start from the very beginning. I was born in 1969, which gives the name of the gallery, and much easier to spell gallery Quang Bao. But also, it was a phenomenal year, especially in America. There was so much progressive change, so many politics. I came to America in 1975 after the war, and I think if I had a second project space, I would call it 1975 because it was about the remake and the second act. But in any case, we moved around after living in refugee camps. My parents were hourly wage workers. We were the typical immigrant family. I come from five. I studied English literature in Boston, and then I went through a program at Columbia for arts management. So that's my education background. I'm actually now in school too. The pandemic sent me back to school.
Wow, really? What are you studying?
I am studying writing with a focus on contemporary art at Harvard.
That is amazing. Congratulations.
You know, when you work in a small gallery, I mean, we are about 5 people. There's just, you learn from other people as I do. And so going to school was a way to just try to firm that up. But most of the beginning of my professional life was in journalism. I edited books and magazines for 10 years. And then I just happened to fall into visual art because some friends made it.
But were those magazines related to the arts? Were you into it, or it was just?
I did 2 things that I love. One was, magazines devoted to literature and books, and then the second set was related to home decor.
Oh, I love that combination.
I love it too, and I miss it. But that only allows me to do maybe more publications and catalogs through the gallery for our artists. This is one of the areas that we're growing next year. I'm very excited about that. And the gallery's been around for now 7 years. We're in year 8 basically, and going well.
Amazing. Tell me something, coming from Vietnam to here, did you always like, I see there's a lot of similarity. I Have you been to Vietnam so far again?
Yeah, I returned, and I'm going next summer. Yes.
Oh, amazing. So there is a lot of similarity from, and I'm visiting Vietnam next month. So there's a lot of research that I've been doing, and I see that there's a lot of similarity between the Vietnam culture and let's say India, but also in the sense of how art is not, let's say, for the main accessible to the masses. It is also reserved for the mainstream, for the aristocratic, and coming from coming from a humble background, how did you really enter into the arts, and did you have any of your own limiting beliefs of making a living in the arts itself?
I've never not believed in working in a creative field. I think there isn't really anything practical about my choices. Yeah. Um, for 5 years, I came to New York City. The first thing I did was I was the director of the Asian American Writers Workshop. So this was a time in America when multiculturalism was thriving. But to answer your question about contemporary art in Vietnam, I have a distant uncle who is actually in charge of an MFA program for visual artists in Hanoi. And a lot of what he teaches has to do with copying masters. I think this is very common. So in the programs, there is a high emphasis on proficiency and maybe less emphasis on a kind of individual outlook, which doesn't then give you much context. So what I see is in the diaspora a more interesting look, and you can see right now at the MoMA in New York City, there's a Vietnamese photographer, Anh Mile, who has a big retrospective and a show there. And there are contemporary Vietnamese American artists that I'm very interested in. Julian Nguyen is one. They're just Christian Nguyen is another artist, and a lot of Nguyongs, Tammy Nguyen, and so forth. But that I would say that a lot of the arts that's contemporary to Vietnam has a lot to do with crafts, very traditional, right? And that's very prized. You can actually make a living making art in Vietnam. It's just never going to be in a commercialized context. It would be like making anything. It has its value. Lacquer paintings and things. I mean, they have their place.
The tableware from Vietnam is all over the world, and I think it's an excellent craft. The lacquerware.
Yeah, and just because there's such a tradition of it, it really is a very like marquetry in the former Soviet. It's like a very complicated, uh, methodical manner of making, right? And if you want it to last, and you want it to shine, and you want it to do the things that lacquer is prized for, then you have to do it this way. And that goes back to this idea of like the traditional methods of art making.
But tell me something. Can you come back to what we were speaking about? How did you get into the arts in the sense of your own approach to the arts? Did you have someone around you that made it like, okay, uh, or I think also growing up in New York really opened you up to that, I think that could also be a huge difference. You were in New York at a time that a lot of things were changing, and that you also took the plunge and you followed that calling.
Well, I would say I have friends who make art, all kinds of art, paintings a lot. My boyfriend also makes art. He's a very incredible sculptor and builder. But my interest at the time was art. Visual art is a very commodified culture, and I was not in my 30s acquisitive. I didn't want objects and things. I wanted them to be. That's why I'm very democratic at the gallery. I feel like the form of visual art is something that the world shares, mostly through museums. But in the end, somebody owns that particular work, right? And so when I was looking in books, nobody owns the ideas of a book. Just the author wrote it, right? And so I met collectors named Susan and Michael Hort. They're wonderful collectors in New York City. They invited me to work for them, and that was my first real foray into contemporary art. You have to understand that I didn't even know that galleries were free.
I love that. I love this story already.
Yeah, so they opened the door, and I walked through, and suddenly that whole world opened it. And then the
No,
second
okay,
thing,
one second, one question. By this time, you were making books, right?
I was editing books. Yeah, I had switched over, then suddenly to working for the Horts. Yeah.
But you had no interest in being a gallerist or opening up a gallery at that point, specifically contemporary or painting.
No, and in fact, I had never really worked in a proper gallery before I opened mine. I think if I had, I wouldn't have. But actually, at the time that I was working for the collectors, I also started an apartment show.
But what kind of work were you doing there as well?
They have a philanthropic charitable organization that donates money to art and cancer. Their daughter had passed away from cancer at the time. So this was an organization established to support individual artists as well as cancer patients. So I was brought into there, but it's in their home. So I became part of this whole art world that was very much part of who they were. Yeah. They had been collecting since 1995. But that prompted me to start my own apartment show. I began a 2-year project to use my guest room as an exhibition space, and it was called Second Guest.
Oh my God, I love that idea.
It was amazing because a lot of the time we showed a lot of artists that now are known, at least in the contemporary American, if not international scene. But it was fun because it was in my home, and we published even a catalog because the last great show in the space was over 30 artists devoted to Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde's wonderful novel. So everybody made work for that summit, and that was at the time when it was most innocent. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so from
Yes,
there,
absolutely.
yeah. Afterwards, I got a job to be artistic director of a project space in Berlin, and I went over to Berlin in 2014 to see the creation of this space, which was funded by a commercial gallery, but was trying to work with artists from all over the world. That was the most fun, but also for me the most instructive because I put so much work into putting together really complicated exhibitions. Um, there was probably an easy way to do it, but in 1 year I learned everything that it takes.
I think specifically when you're also working on projects that's starting from 0 point or a scratch, and then you build along with them, there's so much of a learning curve because you're literally seeing 0 to 1 versus if you go and work somewhere which already has a lot of ecosystem set up. There's a lot of behind the scenes that you maybe are not able to grasp because they've already happened and done or taken care by someone. That's the beauty of being in a startup or a small business as well.
Sure. I mean, this is how innocent it was. In my apartment show, Second Guess, artists got 100% of the sale. I framed everything, I did everything, I baked everything. I mean, I did everything because it just was more about being in touch with them and presenting the work. But when I did this artist project space in Berlin, which was called 68 Projects, I also didn't know financially how it was running. I just spent the money, without an awareness necessarily of the sales connecting to it. So I managed to do a lot of things project, and I think at the time for the gallery, very innovative. But that's why when I came back to New York I came back in 2015, and I wasn't quite clear what I wanted to do. And there was a chorus of people who said, if you do your own thing, we'll come and support you. And that's really how the gallery got started.
What made you take the plunge?
I was massively underemployed. Um,
Every good story has been starting from this point. I don't know why. I don't know how many people have said the same thing.
Well, if you don't work in a traditional setting, there's no assistant associate director. You don't climb, you just jump a lot. And so I have always dreamed of actually owning my own store. I just never knew what I would sell.
Home decor, ever thought about that?
I'd rather buy it than sell it.
But then why paintings? Then why paintings?
Well, painting as a form is what I feel is our most democratic. If you go to any city, any museum, you'll see paintings. Paintings gives us a big chunk of the history of art, right? Up until a certain time, there was nothing but paintings. And I think I love narrative. I love like the texture and the look of paint. I love the imaginative possibilities of paint. Yeah. And I just think most people understand what a painting is. And so I come from that very basic idea, right? And so, yes, the focus of 1969 is very much on painting, though we have exhibits across all the different forms.
This notion of being self-taught is such a big one for artists. Someone who is now not, you're on the other side of it, being a gallery owner, navigating, never ever, someone who never knew how a gallery works like, and then starting your own and making your own rules and making your own books, like, metaphorically. What do you think has been the biggest upside and the downside of this process?
Oh, probably the same answer for both, which is that there are no guidelines or specific rules or even laws sometimes for how to do something. You make up everything based on good practices. And tell me, any other business you can think of where someone goes in and says, I'll buy that, and then they don't have to pay for it right away, right? That doesn't work anywhere else. No other store does that. And so there's so many things that are about the trust of human relationships in a gallery. It's not only just like the artist makes the best work of themselves that they can and hands it to you and says, please do something good with this, and you exhibit it, sale, and somebody says, I will buy it and care for it. I mean, this is all running on an incredible amount of trust. And that's why it's very important to be self-regulated. Yeah, you have to be good to your word, you have to be honorable to your deeds, all of it, because it can very easily betray, right? And all the stories, they're happening now. People are doing it, and it's in the news with the Russian oligarch who's been betrayed. As- I mean, just so many instances of this. But I think the upside is I am a person now at age 55 who likes to do what he wants to do the way he does it. I don't care. I didn't open a store to conform to things. I want to be happy and comfortable. I want to be productive and successful in my own way. And I just don't think that that kind of latitude exists in most other kinds of fields.
Yeah, that's true. And I think also when buying a painting, I think one of the most how do I say it? Like you said, you can find a use case for someone to buy a furniture or a product versus there is a lot more than just a use case, or there's a lot of human emotions also involved in this process when you're specifically buying a piece of art, because you really can't put a price or why you want it or a use case to it. You just it's a lot beyond that.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about it. I love that it's about the ideas and the imagination. I love that it's useless. Like, you know, like useless.
It
Um,
also makes it overseas.
yeah, I mean, but there's nothing like it because I'm a person who believes fundamentally that experience is what's important to us. You show up, when you look at an artwork and something happens to you, and you look at it again and you remember how you bought it or the conversation you have. All that is generative. It's very singular. There isn't any other experience like that in the world for you and another object. So that's what makes it so powerful. And people who get that collect, and that's why they have to have it. Yeah. But to answer your other part of the question, I think the downside is the tremendous amount of administrative work that is involved. I do not think anybody understands until they're behind the desk of a gallery how hard it is to be a good secretary, to make those numbers, those conversions, those dollars, those that paperwork, of what we call stewardship, be perfect, and that's hard.
Yeah, that's true. What do you think in the first few years? I'm going to continue on this hardship. The first few years, I think for any business, first 5 years, ideally, it's said like they're the most in hard ones. If you make it for the first one, you're going to survive for the first next three. If you make the next three, and if you survive the five, you are here for a longer run. So you've survived much more than five. So what do you think were the most one of the most hard parts of running a gallery business that often people do not estimate or understand, and what were those for you in the early years of starting the gallery?
I would say, generally speaking, that selling art is like a matchmaking, and matchmaking requires it to be 100%, right? And when there's a couple involved, it's got to be 200%. Both have to. And so what I found very difficult was to try to deal in a speculative fashion. This work was not made when we scheduled the exhibition a year out. So you have no idea what it will be like or who will want it and how you're going to do that. And the lead time that you have is what you need in order to make that matchmaking and placement work. But I think for a young gallery working with emerging artists, which is what our focus is, things are still in development. It's completely unpredictable how things are going to turn out. And you're still dealing with a young population in their 20s and their 30s that are still psychologically, emotionally, creatively growing. And that's also what makes the relationship so deep, is because you're meeting people at transformative stages of their lives.
Yeah, and probably for a longer run.
Yes, yes. And I think for artists, the need to innovate is something that they are that kicks up inside of them. And so I see the gallery in the role of giving them occasions and prompts to do that. But as I say, it doesn't exist. We are talking about something that isn't there, and you're doing that for a very long time. So unlike your notion of a store, you know what's coming in the next season. You know what the line looks like. You have every idea and every opportunity to say, okay, I know several people who would appreciate this. It's not as easy in the art world.
But that's really now nice how you've put it. Now you've spoken about the problem, but now also can you help us understand how you navigate this problem? Like, and also like in a time like today's, where not only galleries, there are self-represented artists, they're doing a lot of own stuff, and and selling has always been, I think making is the part, even if no matter where the starting point is, a lot of artists happen to figure it out in their own time. But what a lot of good skilled artists are not able to figure out is the selling part, on how to have these conversations, how to find collectors, how to actually make this matchmaking. What is your advice for them, and what do you think about this?
And my advice is to find a good gallery. I really don't think that artists can naturally sell on their own because I mean, they do. Let's say that Instagram has made this possible, and some people function really well without that. It's just a lot harder to get into museums. It's a lot harder to get critical reviews. I don't think an artist is a standalone piece of it. It is true that without artists making art, the ecology would collapse. But you need the ecology of everybody working together in order for the careers and the work to get out there. And I think my advice to artists is to try to network within that ecology, meaning your friends who might have shows could recommend you. They could also recommend you galleries that they know. But also, if somebody collects your work, you ask a collector, is there a way you could introduce me to another person who might further my career? You have to work within that network, believing that you cannot go it alone. And nothing looks more ridiculous than an artist who says, I'm brilliant, this is important, this is valid. As a salesperson, it's not really to come from the one making it so easily, because you could just look at and doubt that very much, right? And it's not easy for a person to put her net value worth into a price of a work. I mean, if you're going to price your own work, you might get it really wrong, or you might get it really right, but it's not really an artist's kind of place to put that on. That's inside of the business of a gallery.
Right. Tell me something about how you work with artists in your relationships. How did you find the early years of your artists in the early years, and how have you been, you've now focused on painting, and how do you think has that formed over the years, your interest in showing specifically painters?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I know what I like, and I'm very confident to talk about it. And I know what I don't like. I can even talk about that guy very confidently. I'm not a person who's unsure about how he feels. I'm always trying to search for my feelings for something. And that is that is why so much of what I think 1969 does is very sincere. I really do mean it.
No, I love the representational work that you put out, and the figurative work, and you really, like, I think you really have the nerve of painters. It really reflects in your curation as well.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Well, Sharika, the one thing I must say I love about being a gallery with my artists is I love to meet their families. I love to meet the parents, and that's one thing. I also have had many of the artists that I represent, they have lived with me. That guest room became a true guest when people had, because international, they might have been coming into the country or they might have been in between stays. A lot of them have lived with me. And that's a kind of very special relationship that I value. But also, I am intimate. I don't dream of thousands of people. I only want to go see Maria Fragoso Yara tomorrow. That's it. I'm going to see her. And I have a kinship with her as much as I am to work with her professionally. And I know that some people are very good at dividing that line because they don't want to be in the personal lives of their artists. But I think dealing with such personalities, that you really have to know how to be a comforting friend also. And I think those are the parts that I enjoy a lot about working with the artists. It can also be very frustrating. They never do what they say. They never turn it up on time. They do the opposite of what I say. I don't really. That part is just like I just accept it, right? And as
Part
like
of the
what is
equation.
completely, completely.
No, but okay. Okay, now I'm going to ask you the opposite of this. What is the hardest part of working with artists?
Well, y'all aren't exactly normal. But that's the beauty of it, the other perspective and other ways of doing these. I cannot tell you how fun and amusing and baffling it is for me to talk to artists because the value there is not practical, you know? I've I've worked with artists whose studios are in their laps, just whatever they can make that's the size of their lap. And we've launched those careers too. Uh, I also think that there is such an emotional intensity to the work, especially where it might come from. I remember being with an artist and he made a portrait of his grandfather that who had died. And on the day of his funeral, at exactly the time, he sat down and he made a beautiful painting of him. And the thing that was scaring me on the way to the studio was I said, what if I do not like it? I am not the type of person who would fake it. So I was genuinely worried that the painting of an artist's dead grandfather painted in such a beautiful way, but that one turned out all right. And you can imagine situations in which, I'm not cheap. I don't love everything. I will tell you where I think there are things that are missing in a work. And every day that I've had the gallery, I've been guided by a power question. But recently, I've only had one question that I apply to every work, which is, how is this artwork important? And then I must answer it for myself. And when I do, I'm resolved about what I will do with it, bring it to a fair, exhibit it. But I want things to be important because we don't need more art. We just need everybody better, right? I'm always looking for that. And since I know my artists so well in terms of the context in which they're making their works, I feel quite qualified to have strong opinions about it. And that's why when people come into the gallery to try to buy something, I'm very, very sure. I'm like, I do not like this painting, but I tell you why I'm hanging it because I think it's like, and I'm sincere also in the ways in which I talk about it. Yeah. So that I don't know. I don't have a complaint about my job. Lots of people I know don't love what they do in this world, but I get up every day essentially really enjoying the life that I'm living.
And I think at the end of the day, that beyond the work that we do, the money, the transactions, everything, just getting up every day and knowing that you find that purpose beyond just the smaller details, that you feel excited to get up and meet this person, speak to this person, or look at some work. I think that is a really nice feeling.
Yeah. You know what I love to do also is I love to follow works once they're out of the
Okay.
gallery to see where they go.
And how do you do that?
I call the collector and I say, "Can you send me a picture or can I come over?" And then when it gets to the museum for a show, it's lovely. There it is. It just keeps moving, and I think this is one of the functions.
It's like a baby living its own life.
I don't like that analogy. I don't like babies. Think that I don't think that everything has that precious cargo nature to it. I understand how personal it can be, but I just mean to say that I realize the job of a gallerist is to try to keep the object moving through time, loan it, sell it, get it back. Yeah, so just constantly seeing it, and I've seen things just all over the place sometimes.
See how that's a difference, because for me, my primary lens is that of a maker, of an artist, and you come from the other side, and I love this, how two different perspectives can come together for a same, like you said, like as artists, we look at things very intimately and very personally, and which is often the strength and a weakness both. It works as a strength for artists where we're able to use it as a medium to express ourselves, to make some work, to get creative, but also becomes a hindrance in sometimes, letting go, all the other things. Versus, um, I love the outlook that you've put it as a gallerist, because for you it is it is emotional, but it is also not very personal. So you're not looking it as an extension of you. You're looking it as what a gallerist needs to look at it, as something that needs to move.
I mean, I feel like I'm always the first and the last viewer of all my exhibitions, and therefore of each work in it. And if you think about it, sometimes I always try to explain to artists that everything that they're trying to do will probably be misunderstood, misinterpreted, mishandled, missed talked about wrong. Like you can't be dear because once you put it into the world, it becomes everyone's in that regard. Like all opinions into the gallery are valid, even if they seem a little bit askew. So I think the nature of art is hanging on to their purpose or their meanings. It's gone. It's ours now to talk about, right? They didn't like the Mona Lisa when it first came out, but we've been talking about her for over 500 years because it's all into that conversation, right? And that's how our history is made. So I always think about artists and just easing up on what they think it should mean and how it should be talked about because you can't control that. People see what they want to see, and that's the beauty of it.
I love that. Thank you so much, Kwang. Tell me something. What are you working on next? Any new exciting projects? 1975. When is that going to open?
We had two spaces for a while. It was
Yeah.
so hard because it divided the energies of the team. So now
I
we
did
are.
speak to Keith Smith also, Keith Smith in New York, and he had such a similar view. He was like, I was so tossed between having two galleries that I was like, I'd rather put that energy in one than splitting in two.
Yeah, it's really hard. You just because every show has to be done to that level of accomplishment. You can't. There's no way to cut the corners and everything. I think we're excited about this year, even though it's a hard economy. So far, so good for us. We have a lot of emerging artists, women as well, that we are showing for the first time. We're bringing them through also our circuit of fairs where we've been accepted. I'm especially excited about an LA-based artist named Kate Meisner, who has, at 28 years old, her first museum exhibition in Alabama. So this is going to be a big deal, and it never really comes at such an early age. So I
Yeah,
feel
20 years.
28 years and we did her first solo just in September. So that's happening fast, you know. And I know that part of your focus is on women artists. I'm really glad and grateful to have been a guest into this. One of the things I did when I worked at the Horts was a project called Girls Just Want to Have Funds, um, which was about the disparity of gender in the art of women and money
In
in the
visa,
art.
yeah.
Yeah, which is still going on today. That was 10 years ago. It's still the case now, and I think it's important to just constantly be talking about this in the context of what you're trying to do because it's important. It's still relevant because it's still happening.
Yes, absolutely. No, um I think as like you said, I think there's a lot of disparity specifically within the art world. Let's say we need a lot more gallery owners to come in so that artists can do the job that they're good at. And you know for people, for galleries, art dealers, collectors, consultants, they can do the job that they are good at. Similarly, we need a lot more women in the arts with the female perspective to bring to counterbalance that, to make sure that there is a collective female voice, which is still not as strong as it should have been. But I think we're all doing our parts, and hopefully we'll be there soon.
Yeah. When you think about the art world back in the early days, there were a lot of women gallerists that were shaping things, and they're still around today. And I'm grateful to be near a block of like strong women gallerists, like the two women at PPOW, Anat Ebgi, who opened in Los Angeles but now has a space in New York. This is just, I think this is augurs well for that.
But tell me something. One question I actually missed, and I'm going to ask you again. How do you're in the works of spotting, launching, let's say, emerging artists, right? We're also speaking about disparities. We're also speaking about, okay, women needs more, and we do understand that that is an important. Now, someone who's also responsible of making a lot of those things happen in your own way, how do you make sure that how you're spotting what, finding out the talent that you'd like to support, and also dealing with the same problem that we're talking about, to making sure that you are also being conscious enough to know that we are not adding to the problem, instead supporting the cause.
It's a tricky one. I think people who are devoted to this issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, we think about it a lot. We just hired at the gallery. I was very conscious of wanting to have a team that reflected some of the values that you're just talking about. That's one thing. The second thing is you can't do it the same way. You have to approach it differently. So when I go to studio visit, I always want to see other studios, but I always want to make some purposeful intent to go see more women artists and more folks of color working because they're there. I myself just have to be conscious enough to drive myself there. You have to also understand that as a businessman, what can you say when in fact male work sell roughly three times the amount when women accomplish the same? So now my rent is due. What do you think I am supposed to do? Right? I want to pay my rent as much as I want to go to heaven and do good, right? And this is a constant balancing act. But the thing I think that's important to look at overall is what is this person or this gallery doing over time? It is the all of it, not just not just the counting of this season, but over the nearly 8 years in which we have been working, have we been true to those values? And I think it's very clear. Yeah. So I think that's the way to assess a record. And you can't just be um, doing our next group show and counting up the number of men and women and saying, oh, that's a gallery that's like this or that. I don't think that that's fair. We're in a much, this is historic. right? And needs a much longer view than just the blasted political moment.
You have to judge the book by not only its chapter, but the whole essence of it.
You bet. And you got to finish it all. You got to look at it very carefully before anything is said like that. Sure. Yeah. I'm confident about what we're doing. It comes naturally to me. I'm interested in other. I love difference. I like anything that I don't have, like that is new to me. I just so diversity has many abstract aspects too.
What is, let's say, if I were to tell you, like, is there like this aha moment or something that comes to your mind? Okay, this, oh, you look at someone's work and you've, let's say, never seen before, spotted another artist or something, and you feel like, what is that moment that makes you feel like, okay, this is someone that I've been looking for, a work I would love to represent, or this matchmaking, and you know that this is like very good match, like you and the, I think, because for you it has to be a primary you and the artist to be a good match, and then making a good match with the collector.
Right. I guess for me, when I'm going to a studio, especially for people under age 30 or in an MFA program, I'm looking at all of the things that I see and not necessarily the moment of aha. It's not there yet. For me, the aha is in the future to be made. The best work of emerging artists is ahead of them. So it's not really like what I'm looking for is the potential. And this is what makes gallery life so hard is you have to actually kind of like predict the future direction of that artist. Where it go somewhere interesting? Might it become important? You really have to mind read it. But then on some very practical level, when you're with an artist, the aha is personal. It's kind of like I like this person. She talks sensibly about her work. She's fun to be around. Like there's some basic things that also have to be there that give that artist a chance. So it isn't just the artwork; it's the entirety of the experience of being with that person in that world that they've created. And for me, I'm looking for that. So the aha is like, yes, this whole world has a possibility. And then every once in a while, there's always one artwork that I think, oh my gosh, how fun, Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. There's always something, There's always something. So that part is how I build my collection necessary.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kwang. It was so nice speaking to you, and thank you so much for your time.
I'm really glad you're doing this from that part of the world. Yeah, and you should just keep trucking.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. And I'll keep you posted, and I'll hope we'll stay in touch.
Thank you. Bye bye.